our flight expert today, Dr. Craig Merrett, and he's an assistant professor in mechanical and aerospace engineering at Carleton University, which is in Ottawa, but he's actually calling into camp today from Houston, so he's quite a ways away. So thank you very much, Dr. Merrett, for calling in today to our camps and taking the time to answer some questions. It's awesome. So I'd like to welcome all our camps as well. We have Ancaster, London, and Woodstock. Hello, everybody. Okay, can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds like there's quite a delay. That's okay. So, as you know, today is flight day, and the campers are making a variety of airplanes, helicopters, and even an ornithopter. So they're learning about what makes objects fly, concepts like lift, drag, and stored energy. So before we go to the questions from the campers, I'll turn it over to Dr. Merrett, who can tell us a bit more about what he does with flight at Carleton University.
Thank you. So good morning, everyone. I'm an aerospace engineer. What that means is I work on airplanes, and not just airplanes, but also helicopters and rockets. What I do most of my time is actually, I'm a teacher. As a professor, I teach classes. So from about September through to April, I have students just like you, just a little bit older, and I teach them about how you design and build an airplane. During the summer is when I get to be really an engineer, and I work on how airplanes will be 30 years from now, what kind of materials will we put in them, what kind of computers, can we make the airplanes go faster or more comfortable for passengers? Just a question for all of you, how many of you have flown on an airplane before? All right, quite a few. So probably when you flew on the airplane, your ears popped. One of the things that I work on is how to make the aircraft more comfortable so that your ears don't have to pop. That should make your ride a bit more enjoyable. Now I think 2 of the videos have frozen.
Yeah. Actually, all the videos are frozen from my view, but I can hear you all right, so I'm listening along.
Okay.
I think that they can probably hear us too.
All right. So I know you're looking at helicopters, ornithopters, and flight in general. Do you have any questions? And it can be any questions at all about airplanes or maybe just engineering. I'd be happy to take them up and answer them, and hopefully we'll have a little fun.
Yeah, great. So why don't we start in London? Any questions about airplanes and engineering for Dr. Merrett in London?
Today we built ornithopters, or we are going to build ornithopters, and I'd like to know how successful a manned ornithopter would be.
All right,
Good
so the question is, how successful is a manned ornithopter? So far, there's only ever been one manned ornithopter built. It's actually in Toronto, and they don't work very well. They will actually get off the ground and they'll flap, but you use so much energy to keep the ornithopter airborne that you're actually wasting energy compared to a helicopter or an airplane. So they will work, they're just not the best use of energy.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for that question. Let's go now to Woodstock. for the next question, please.
What speed does a plane need to get till it can take off?
All right, so this is a really good question. It does depend on the type of airplane. So if we look at a big passenger aircraft, like the ones that you've probably flown in, they need to be going about 250 kilometers an hour to get off the ground. So that's faster than a car.
Much
for most
faster.
things.
Wow, yeah.
For small airplanes, where maybe it's just the pilot and one passenger, they can get off the ground at about 40 or 50 kilometers an hour.
Okay. So let's go to Ancaster now. Is there a question about airplanes or engineering in Ancaster for Dr. Merrett?
What does it feel like to be on a plane?
What does it feel like to be on a plane? Well, when you first get on the plane, it sort of feels like you're getting on a bus. So if you've taken a school bus or maybe a public transportation bus with your parents, it's a bit like that. There's a lot of people. You all try to crowd into the seats. The only thing that's different from a bus, you're not allowed to stand on an airplane. Everyone has to have a seat. Once everyone's seated, they start moving the airplane to the runway. At that point, it still kind of feels like a bus because you're just rolling along the ground. When you know that you're on an airplane is when they start to take off, because what will happen when they turn on the engines, there's so much thrust, you're pressed back in your seat. So you might have felt this before in your car if one of your parents had pressed the gas pedal a little bit hard, you would sort of jerk back in your seat. That's what it's like on an airplane. And you are pressed back into the seat, and about a minute later, you're off the ground, and that's it. You don't float or anything. It's not like space, but if you look out the window, the ground is far, far away, and you can see all the clouds. You can actually see rainbows, but rather than the arch that you see on the ground, the rainbows from an airplane are complete circles. So it's very pretty to be up above the clouds. You get to see the sunrise if you're flying in the right direction, or the sunset. So if you haven't been on an airplane, maybe convince your parents to take a trip somewhere. It's a lot of fun.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I'd love to see a circular rainbow. That sounds really cool. I'll have to take a trip soon somewhere.
Yes.
All right. So our camps have submitted questions on Twitter as well, and a question that they've all asked is, how does an airplane take off? How does an airplane take off?
Okay, so how does an airplane take off? This is actually a fairly tricky question. When I'm acting as a teacher for my own students, it takes about a week to explain just how an airplane takes off. But I'll give you the much easier, shorter version. On its own, when an airplane is just sitting on the ground and it's not moving, it can't produce any lift. And lift is what makes the airplane come off the ground. The only way we can produce lift is by having air flow over the aircraft wings. So I've actually made a little paper airplane. I have two little wings. So as the air flows over the wing, what will happen is I'll create a little vacuum on the top of the wing. So if you played with a vacuum at home, maybe helping your parents with their chores, the vacuum will suck the wing up. we can actually have this happen for an airplane that's not moving if it's a really windy day. So I mentioned earlier that we have big airplanes and little airplanes. One of the worries with the small airplanes is if it's a really windy day, like in August or September, sometimes you get very strong winds. The wind will actually pick up the airplane and make it fly and then put it down again. Well, it crashes the airplane, basically. For a passenger airplane, we create the wind by having the engines, because the engines suck in air, which causes the airplane to go forwards. And as the airplane is going forwards, we have air flowing over the wings. And if we are going fast enough forwards, we'll produce lift. At the moment we produce lift, we're off the ground, so we've taken off. And all of this has to happen in a very short distance. Most runways at the airport are about 5,000 to 6,000 feet long. The airplane has to take off in the first 3,000 feet. If the pilot decides not to take off, they need the additional 3,000 feet to apply the brakes and slow the airplane down. So that's a really good question about how do airplanes take off.
Yeah, I think you did a pretty good job of explaining such a complicated question. Thanks, Dr. Merritt. So let's go now back to London for our second round of questions. Is there a camper with a question for Dr. Merritt in London?
We have a two-part question. How big can an airplane be and still fly?
And how many seats can it hold?
All right. So how big can an airplane be and still fly, and how many seats will it hold? The biggest aircraft ever built was in the 1950s. Its wings were about 400 feet long, so from wingtip to wingtip. To give you an idea of just how big that is, your standard car, so the car that your parents have, is usually about 15 to 20 feet long. So at 500 feet, just imagine a whole row of cars parked end to end. And that airplane was so big that it had its own post office, movie theater, room for, I think, 300 people, and a whole classroom almost. So it had a lot of space. Now it crashed because it wasn't that well built. It only flew a few times. The biggest airplane today that works is the Airbus A380. So you may have seen pictures of this airplane. It has 2 floors. You'll see 2 rows of windows. That airplane can fit about 450 to 500 passengers, depending on how close we put the seats. And you'll probably in your lifetime, so about 30 years from now, you'll see another airplane. It looks really weird because most airplanes today have a tube down the middle and wings. This new airplane has, well, looks like a triangle, and it will seat 800 people.
Wow. Wow.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Yeah, thanks, London. Let's go back to Woodstock for the next question.
How old were you when you went on your first plane ride?
How old was I when I went on my first plane ride? Well, to give you an idea, by the time I was 17 months old, so a little over a year and a half, I had been on 17 planes. So my very first plane flight, I was 3 weeks old. So I was just a baby. Since then, I've lost count how many planes I've been on.
So I guess you've always loved to fly.
Yes.
Sounds like it, yeah. Cool. All right. So let's go to Ancaster now for the next question, please.
How much horsepower is needed to fly a plane?
All right. So the question is, how much horsepower is needed to fly a plane? So this is just how powerful the engine is so that it can suck in enough air to get the airplane off the ground. Now, in engineering, actually, rather than using horsepower, we use something called kilowatts. It's a different unit of power. You may have seen a watt, W-A-T-T, on your light bulb. So when you go home, if you look at your light bulb, it'll say like 100 W. That W means watts. It's how much power does the light put out. On a big passenger airplane, each engine will put out several thousand watts. The other way we look at engines and how powerful they are is how much thrust they put out. So that's how much air they're pulling through and blowing out the back. Most passenger airplanes will put out about 45,000 pounds of thrust. So 1 pound, to give you an idea, if you go to your kitchen when you get home, have your parents show you either like a bag of sugar or a bag of flour. On the side of the label, it'll say just how heavy it is in kilograms and pounds. A small bag of sugar that's about this big is usually around 2 kilograms. So that's about 4 pounds. Imagine piling 10,000 of those bags of sugar, and that's just how much thrust a jet engine will produce.
Okay.
If you want to think about it,
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
if you want to think about how powerful an engine is compared to a car, because usually with cars we say that they have, let's say, 200 horsepower. A jet engine is about 10 to 20 times more powerful than a car.
Okay, yeah. I was gonna ask, is there a reason why the plane's power is measured in kilowatts and not horsepower, or is it just how it is?
The reason why we use watts, because that's the metric system. So we have two units of measure. The easiest one is when you look at a ruler, because you have inches and centimeters. So centimeters are metric, and it's probably what most of you are learning in school. Inches is an older system, but it's still used down here in the US quite a bit. So
Yeah.
horsepower is part of that inches system.
Okay, thanks. So we're coming to an end of our time with Dr. Merritt, but let's go to London just for the last question. Is there a camper with one last question in London? Hi.
I was just wondering, how far did the Wright Brothers fly?
Okay, so this is a history question. How far did the Wright brothers fly? On the very first successful flight, they only flew about 100 or 120 feet. To give you an idea of just how far that is, if you've seen a picture of the space shuttle, they flew the length of the space shuttle.
All right. Well, not too bad for the first flight ever.
No.
All right. So that's all the time for today. I'd like to thank you, Dr. Merritt, so much for calling into our STEM camps and answering all of the campers' questions on flight day. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, and have a good day.
Thank you. And thanks to all of our parents as well. Bye, everyone.